Good evening, and welcome to the 11th chapter of the One Book, One Minnesota statewide book club featuring In the Night of Memory by Linda LeGarde Grover. The One Book, One Minnesota program is presented by the Minnesota Center for the Book in partnership with the State Library Service. I'm Elaine Hopkins, the Director of Programs and Services for the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, which is the Library of Congress designated Minnesota Center for the Book. As such, we present programming that reaches all corners of the state and promotes reading, libraries, and our state's literary legacy. The Minnesota Center for the Book is housed on Dakota land. We acknowledge and value the traditions of storytelling embedded in our state's land by Minnesota's original stewards of story, the Dakota, Ojibwe, and the many other tribal nations that call this place home. We at the Friends honor the knowledge of place, community, and culture rooted in these living stories as we work to lift up the voices of storytellers across our state. Please take a look at the link in the chat to learn more about the Dakota people's relationship to Minnesota through the Budote Memory Map, Indigenous Justice Fact Sheets, and the Land Back Movement. Tonight's programming has live captioning provided by Veritext Captioning, and we are thrilled to welcome attendees from all over the state. Thank you all for choosing to spend your time with us this evening. Now, I am honored to introduce our featured guests. Linda LeGarde Grover is a professor of American Indian Studies at the University of Minnesota Duluth and a member of the Boys Fort Band of Ojibwe. Her novel, The Road Back to Sweetgrass, received the Wordcraft Circle of Native Writers and Storytellers, a fiction award, as well as the Native Writers Circle of the Americas First Book Award. The Dance Boots, a book of stories, received the Flannery O'Connor Award and the Janet Heidinger Kafka Prize. And her poetry collection, The Sky Watched, Poems of Ojibwe Lives, received the Red Mountain Press Editors Award and the 2017 Northeastern Minnesota Book Award for Poetry. Anagame Singh, Seasons of an Ojibwe Year, won the 2018 Minnesota Book Award for Memoir and Creative Nonfiction and the Northeastern Minnesota Book Award. Linda is joined in conversation tonight by Mona Susan Power, the author of 4 books of fiction, including The Grass Dancer, awarded a Penn Hemingway Prize, Roof Walker, winner of the Milkweed National Fiction Prize, Sacred Wilderness, winner of the Electra Quinney Award, and the newly released A Council of Dolls. She's a graduate of Harvard College, Harvard Law School, and the Iowa Writers Workshop. She's an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. Her short stories and essays have appeared in numerous publications and anthologies, including the Best American Short Stories series, the Atlantic Monthly, the Paris Review, the Missouri Review, Plowshares, and Granta. Linda and Mona will be happy to answer questions from the audience after their conversation. So you can feel free to start with or throughout the conversation, put those questions in the chat. Welcome to you both, Linda and Mona, and thank you so much for being here. It's my pleasure to hand things off to you now.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor. Mona and I have known each other for some time now. And she, let's see, I can't even remember when we met. I think it was when one of your earlier books came out and you were up in Duluth at the library here for a reading. And we've done a lot of things together since then. Mona has visited my classroom, and wherever we go, whatever we do, we have a blast, don't we?
Absolutely. And I knew of you before I knew you. I was already a fan of your writing with your first book, and it was such a pleasure to reread this book. As I was telling you, I read it when it first came out, and even though I come from a different tribal nation, a different territory, there were so many characters that made me remember people I knew growing up, and it just is heartwarming in so many ways. And even though there's such difficult, challenging things that happen to the characters that they go through, there's so much tenderness and so much love. It feels like it's such a big-hearted novel. And so I'm just thrilled to be here with you because I just respect you as a person, as a writer, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about your book. And would you like to start with a reading?
Yes, I think I will. I'll start with the beginning of the book. In the Night of Memory is about two girls, it starts out when they're little girls who go into the foster system and have their, their various experiences and adventures, and eventually with some prodding from their tribe and the Indian Child Welfare Act, are returned to relatives in their family. And so then their life changes again. But, it's never completely where you left off, is it, when you have a break like that? So the book really is, their mother is missing. And so I will start with the very first couple of pages here. Azure Sky is speaking. Our mother, Loretta, gave us the most beautiful name she could think of. She gave us a memory, one that I have told to Rainey so many times that to her it has become real, although I wonder if it ever happened at all and is only one of my dreams. And when Rainey was 4 and I was going on 3, our mother gave us to the St. Louis County foster care system. It was the same year that Duluth's mining heiress Elizabeth Congdon was murdered by her daughter and son-in-law. The crime was spectacular, and although it happened decades ago, now it is still talked about in town, and every time it comes up, I think of my mother, as I always do. She and Miss Congdon, whose lives never intersected, are linked in this single way. Rainfall Dawn and Azure Sky are our real names, the ones Loretta wrote down for our birth certificates, though she called us Rainy and Azure most of the time. When she wanted something or was stressed or had been drinking or all three, baby and sister. Rainy was baby because she was born first, and I was sister because I came second a year and a half later. Nobody has called us baby and sister since the morning Loretta was getting us ready to go on that cab ride to the county. We haven't seen her or heard from her since, I think. I'm not sure. Although Rainey and I have forgotten Loretta's face, Rain occasionally thinks she sees our mother in the gracefully bending woman at the butcher counter whose long hair sweeps to the side as she looks at a tray of pork chops. She might see her in a traditional dancer wearing a dark blue calico dress at the Mauget Point Spring Powwow, who, turning to face the flags during grand entry, is in fact our Aunt Margie. Or in the bundled up homeless woman picking aluminum cans from the trash barrel at the bus hub in downtown Duluth. I have forgotten our mother's voice, and yet I still hear her husky whisper from the night she woke us to see the northern lights and watch her dance. And it is this memory that I choose for us to keep, whether it was just a dream or really happened. And so my mother still whispers to me when it starts to rain and drops of liquid quench the thirst within the sparse leafiness of the old maple tree in the front yard, the wet patter deepening on saturated leaves, rolling water onto the dryness of exposed roots. She whispers to me in the absence of rain, on days that the wind picks up and scatters dried leaves across the sidewalk, in the braking of a city bus, or in the weighty freedom of northern lights in the night sky. Sometimes I hear her all day, and other times not for months, and I think she's gone for good after all. And then once again she whispers, and on the air, grown warm and damp with her breath, is what I had forgotten, the perfume of cigarette, the yeasty sweetness of white bread and red wine. So, thank you.
I love that opening so much. I remember thinking this is just the perfect entryway into a book, into a family, into a world. I can't put it down. And the language is just so beautiful. And anyway, okay, I have a few questions here. I have to write them down because I forget things a lot these days. And so with my projects, they often come to me in very strange sorts of ways out of the blue. And so I'm curious, I wrote down, what was the first impulse or line or image that inspired you to write in the Night of Memory? And did you write it in the order in which it's published, or play around with various ideas of how to structure the overarching story?
I thought that I would like to continue the fiction I'd been writing about northeastern Minnesota, about Duluth and towns on the Iron Range and on a fictional reservation up north. And I thought I would like to continue that with the story of children in the foster care system. And so that's where I started. I started writing about two sisters. And then, I guess I don't, well, like you, Mona, I really don't have a lot of control over people in these books. And so eventually, as not far into what I was writing, they're just naked longing for their mother just really emerged. And I thought, well, of course, you don't end up in foster just, things don't happen in a vacuum. How did they end up here? And where's their mother? And so from there, then I thought about, we all have heard of or know Native women who have who are absent, who've gone missing. They're just, we don't know where they are. And even in my own family, there's a woman a couple generations back who seemed to have just vanished. And so I thought about that and how somebody with children, especially with little girls, how they would feel about this, but also the whole community. It's it's a fabric woven of people's lives and stories and spirits. And so that is where I think the book really started to pull itself together, and the girls and everyone who had a memory or a connection to Loretta then came into the picture.
Well, and that actually leads me to, well, I'll hold that one off till later. I noticed that you organized, because you were taking us through different eras in time, and there were a number of different characters, and it seemed to be organized in terms of location as opposed to time. And that really fascinated me. So you organized the different generation stories via place, location, rather than any time period. And is that because of this focus on your territory, so that's almost the territory trumps everything else in a way? Or I don't know if I'm explaining that right.
I think so because these are in our, the stories of nonfiction of real people too. Our stories, as were the people before us and the people after us, are played out against the landscape of where we are. And my family has lived in this area for a really long time, and I almost, it's not like watching a play, and yet in my mind I feel it. I feel that story running against the terrain. And there are changes in terrain, cities have gone up, roads have been built, but the constant there is the place, the sacredness of the place, no matter what we do with it. I mean, I know people get really, sometimes I think people think that building a parking lot negates the sacredness of a place, but it does not. That is something temporary, man-made, and really frail as mankind is, and will one day be gone too, just as we are. And so, to me, yes, having that sense of this is happening on this place is important. I hadn't deliberately organized it that way, Mona, but I'll be darned, you're right.
It's intuitive. I know I'm an intuitive writer, and so I'll figure out later why I made certain choices, because as you mentioned too, they didn't feel like choices. I just was following this instinct, this inner guidance, ancestors, wherever it comes from. And I loved how you made each of these places became such characters in and of themselves. I mean, even just that door that was painted Tannenbaum green, and then,
yes,
and how a house had one character at one period and then became the lady slipper. What was it? The lady slipper
lady
house?
slipper house.
Yes, became a whole nother little character. And so I just appreciated that so much. One thing I want to talk about, so I'm actually somebody who will comb through Goodreads, and because it's so influential these days. When it comes to the business end of publishing, and I'm always curious to read some of the reviews of readers of my favorite Native authors and what they're saying. And one thing that comes up over and over is that even when readers have enjoyed the story, so many of them complain about the polyphonic strategy of having multiple characters telling a story, which so many Indigenous authors do. And so they'll say it's too disjointed. Why can't you just pick one protagonist to tell the story, and then we'll just be able to understand it so much better. And there are a lot of complaints on some amazing, amazing, award-winning, gorgeous novels about that. And so I'm curious what you think about why we do that. Why? Because I'm sure a lot of us, we're not saying, I'm going to write a polyphonic, novel.
No,
No.
no. In fact, I never even thought about that word until I read that actually in somebody's review of one of my pieces here. And that's I guess that is the way that our stories have come forth over time. And also that awareness of the group and the world around you, and that each of us is only one tiny little piece of a much larger story. I think it's a humble way to look at the world, at the past and present and future. And I also think it's respectful, because it acknowledges and honors everybody else around us. So it's never like, in what I'm writing anyway, there's never like one big hero of the story. The anchor of this book is Azure and Rainey and their missing mother. And so, like the landscape, they're almost like something that the story plays out against too. But there is always much more involved than just one person going through, and one of my favorite books is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is about one little girl, and she's there all the way through the story, but many other characters and places and past and present move through that book. And I've always just really enjoyed reading that book because of that, not just because of that little girl, but because of everyone else around her, and seeing how they really are. Without them, does she even exist?
I loved that book. I've probably read that book at least a dozen times over the years, going back to childhood. Yes, I'm so glad that you brought that up. It's time for me to maybe read it again.
Yes.
But yeah, I once I think it was in grad school, I had to write like the opening of an autobiography. We were told that was an assignment in class. And I was starting with my ancestors. So by the end of my autobiography, I hadn't gotten to me yet, because I never thought of myself as me standing alone. It was always a part of this line of ancestors and community members. And so I couldn't imagine just having a book with just one protagonist or one character you fought, because they don't stand alone. They're connected to so many others. And also, I like to have multiple narrators, because we don't understand. If you only have one consciousness telling the story, often they're not understanding everybody who is involved. And so I loved it when you have that section where we are allowed to hear Rainey's perspective, why she's getting really agitated at one point, and being inside of her, and what that feels like was so powerful. And I don't think anyone else could have, she was the only one who could describe that so powerfully.
She is, and she just began talking, I guess, as I was writing. And so, yes, I was writing about her sister, and she, they're going down to Park Point, and they meet these guys, and but then Rainey just began to. It's almost like, and I have something to say here, in her little voice, and so she just began to, I don't know, her experience began to insert itself into the story. And it was a real gift to me to be able to kind of be inside her for that brief time.
And that's all you needed. I mean, you didn't have to have more. It really helped us to understand so much more about where she was coming from, what it was like being her. And well, I could go on and on, but I'll one of the questions that actually, this isn't mine, but was suggested that I think it is really important about your book. Perhaps you could talk about the importance of women as the keepers of stories and the responsibilities they take on the responsibility they take on to share them and keep them alive. Because it really did feel that in your novel, it was this community of women who were the keepers of the stories and who would sit down and reminisce and try to puzzle things out, and became that council of elders that rescued Dolly's house. And I loved that. Not that they didn't have men helping them, but they were the generators of so much, you know.
I know. Oh, do we have a council of elders? Well, we do now.
Yeah, here we go. And they knew who to call on right away. We'll tap so-and-so and we'll tap so-and-so, and there we got a plan.
I enjoyed the older ladies. I have been able to write about some characters at times in their lives when they're very, very young, and then when they're very old. And I've really, I don't know, I felt honored to be able to do this with these folks. And so I guess women kind of hang together a lot and converse a lot. I was reading somewhere about during early colonial times in America that women were around all the time and men weren't. They were out doing the things men do. And I thought, oh, very much like old time Native ways of doing things, where women, whether you ever have whether you ever birth a child or not, you are of the gender that brings life to the world, and are honored in that way. And also with that have great obligations then, and not only to one's own biological child, but to all children. And so I think women have traditionally spent a lot of time in that very early nurturing time for both genders. And I think that probably is a big part of why the keeping and passing on of stories and knowledge, so much of it happens in women's circles. Whether we are, I mean, gosh, Mona, I can remember we were sitting eating spaghetti in Minneapolis once, and I felt like our stories were just going back and forth and back and forth. And I think it's been that way for many, many generations. And there are men in, certainly men in these stories. And, surely some of my male ancestors, elders, talked to me and gave me a lot of knowledge and information, I guess, too, that, of course, is interwoven with this. But yes, I think there is a particular way of woman listening and caring for and passing on stories and knowledge.
Yes, and that reminds me of one of the scenes I loved so much is when the girls are going to go to a powwow, and they're just, this whole community is new to them, and they're nervous, they're excited, but they're nervous. And then Crystal, who isn't much older than they are, she immediately is sort of taking charge of them to help bring them into the community. And then it's a lot of women who are like, oh, scoot over, or oh, let's make room, oh, save those 2 chairs for these girls. And just that warmth and that kindness of, oh, these are Loretta's girls, and what we couldn't do for her, let's do for her girls.
Yes, and I think communities feel that way a lot about young people who have had really difficult times in life, and sometimes we haven't been able to deliver for their mothers and dads, and we do our best for the children. And I feel that way myself about so many well, now people my grandchildren's ages, and I just I give little prayers for them, and wish them well all the time. The school year is starting, and I made sure to do my very, very best wishes for them, and I think people did the same for us years ago. You can't do everything
Yeah.
for everybody, even
Right.
much as you love some people, you just cannot do everything for them. And so then you think, well, what can I do? What can I do to help? And sometimes the best is your prayer.
Mhm. And this isn't a question I wrote down, but something you mentioned earlier reminded me of how much I admired the light way that you introduce history of these communities. For example, when you're explaining about the allotted Indians versus those who are unallotted, and how that impacted many of their fortunes going forward into later generations, or you brought up the Indian Child Welfare Act, and you didn't do it in the way of, I am now teaching you history, this is about my people's history. It was just so natural, just so you're just giving people enough that they'll be able to understand the story. But they'll still, maybe if they know nothing about these things, they might do some digging on their own. And I was wondering if that was the teacher in you, all of your years, that you just, I don't know, it just felt like it just was so natural. You were never trying hard the way that you introduced culture or you introduced history into the book.
Yeah, it just, it just kind of, especially historical things, it was deliberate on my part, to slip some of these things in. Well, I mean, because they are so, the impact of federal Indian policy and the programs involved in them, in through today too, are just so profound. And so, many Native people in reading what I write will recognize and know this, but not everybody will. And many non-Native people won't. And so I try perhaps a gentle way to put it in there. I think of, when I'm doing this, I have to say, Mona, I am picturing cold butter on a warm butter knife
Oh,
as I'm writing, and it's kind of melting.
great.
And
Oh,
I know we all have these little pictures in our heads as we're doing things, and that is mine. And so it's a butter knife,
mhm,
but it's a way of putting it there where I don't want to have people feeling defensive or
mhm,
put off in any way, or I mean, sometimes people have told me they feel kind of bad when they read some of these things that they really didn't know about in history. and
mhm,
and I've
mhm.
even had people say, and I'd like to apologize, and I say, that certainly that's not you, and
Yeah.
let's just go forward, and all live the best lives that we can.
Oh, absolutely. I've been so grateful to the readers reviewing my new book, who say, "Why didn't I learn this in school? Why do we not know anything about this? I'm so glad that I'm learning about this now, talking
Mhm.
about especially the Indian boarding schools and the devastation that continues even to today." On a very different note, this is sort of selfish of me, but I just wanted to ask you to talk about a few characters I absolutely loved, who reminded me of people I knew growing up, who are just, they would be considered maybe side characters, but for me, they just really grabbed my heart. The couple, Winnie and Ingram, I loved them so much. And Howard, Vernon Jr.'s friend Howard, he reminded me of a Ho Chunk man, Phil, who treated me and my mom that same way, that he would come up to us and be good to us when he was sober, but he would keep a respectful distance when he'd been drinking.
Mhm.
And I just love those three so much, and the ways they help people in their very different ways.
They are different ways. And, Howard, I think many people know somebody like Howard. And, and a word that I think of often with men like this, I mean, two words I think of are like gallant and courtly. And to someone who is, kind of leaning up against a building downtown or sitting on the sidewalk, that might not be the first word that comes to mind, but it is really the essence of these men. And they're people who certainly bring a strength to the fabric of the people in their own way too. Certainly they have their struggles. And I'm glad that you liked Ingram and Winnie. I saw them once many years ago at a rummage sale, and I saw a man sitting. He was kind of elderly and he looked exhausted. I think he might have had a bad heart or something. And I noticed that he was wearing nail polish, and he was wearing a suit. Men used to go around in suits. And I noticed he was wearing nylon stockings and his men's Oxfords. I kind of, and then I noticed that he was with a woman, and I wondered, and I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, and I wondered if that was an actual biological woman or a man. And I didn't really say, well, I didn't say anything at all. My mother she kind of whispered to me, "Don't stare at people," which is always good direction for a child. And
my mother used to say, "Well, she chooses to stare so much. Don't be like that."
Don't be like that. So, but I do remember them, and I always, at the rummage sale, I mean, they didn't seem to be talking to other people or anything. The man was sitting there, and the woman was, looking at stuff. And I always felt kind of bad for them because they seemed isolated. And so I have no idea what their names were, but they became Ingram and Winnie.
And I mean, they were just, these such rescuers at an important time, and just always so full of hope,
Yes, Winnie especially. I mean, the eternal optimist, that just looking, I'm going to look at the bright side here.
Oh, one thing I wanted to ask, Loretta's presence in the novel is so interesting because in one sense she's central, just so central, and yet she's so ethereal. We can't really get our, she's always kind of, well, she's the missing woman, and so she's taken away from us too. And we're trying to, and the way you end the book and that image was just so powerful. But what I was wondering is, what do you think Loretta would want us to know if she could step from the pages of the book and address us?
She would want us to know, I think, as many women who are really struggling in that way, who have children. I've worked in K-12 education, and so many times a mother who is really, really challenged and really kind of backed into a corner on things will just say, "I love my kids." And of course, of course you do. And I always, I don't want to say, "Oh, of course you do." I just, I always nod, and then, try to move things in a good and positive direction for them and the children. And I think that is what Loretta would say. And I know it might, it just sounds so simple, but it really says so much, and what she was trying so hard to do, and how defeated she was at having to do this, and also not wanting the county to come to the apartment and drag the children out of there. And so I think it took just tremendous courage and love for her kids, for her to be able to do that, to get into the cab and be able to do that. But it breaks my heart, to think of that moment of the elevator doors closing.
Absolutely. And you're right. It would have been infinitely more traumatic for the children if they'd been dragged away from her, as opposed to, it's traumatic enough the way it went down, but it would have been even worse. And what do you hope readers will take away from this book?
I hope
from the books that are all set in your territory, that are addressing different eras, different points in history.
I feel like what I've heard and what I've learned and what older people were willing to tell me when I wanted so much to know, and you can't go running up to somebody and say, so tell me, that they were so perceptive and so generous. And I think it's because they wanted this to continue, the story to continue, for things to not be forgotten. And so that is, I think, why I do this. I want it, it's not oral tradition, but I think we kind of got sucked into that. I think that's a colonial term, oral tradition. And somebody said, oh yeah, this is what, but I think what it really is a means of communication and survival, and really a love for the past and for the future too. And so to tell a story in fiction, usually this is the way it was and this is the way it is now, and then kind of leave it open and understood, and this is our hope for the future.
Hmm.
And I have to say, in writing about little girls, and I do really like your new book. I
Thank
love this,
you.
but you are writing about little girls too. And so writing from not just a woman's perspective, but a child's perspective, a little girl, is something where I think we can really, we can be sitting right with the girls and their vulnerability, and also their tremendous strength that they have because they are Native girls,
Mhm.
young Native people. They might not realize it yet, but it is something that they can grow into.
Absolutely. I was just going to say
Mhm.
that we don't always think of ourselves as strong. And then you start thinking about some of the things that have happened and that you survived and you were able to help someone through something and you think, oh, we're really strong.
We are really, really strong, and we're really lucky. And that was, my dad used to always say that we're lucky. And he didn't mean like we're oh, I don't know, be thankful for what you have or anything. I think he meant that we are genuinely lucky. And so he would say, wow, that was lucky.
Yeah.
Wasn't that lucky? And I started to really look at things, and I had to make myself do it, look at things in that way too. It's like, wow, good luck, you know?
Yeah. Well, and the way I grew up, because my mother was such an activist and we were living in some of these movements with other people, but we always had a home to go to. We weren't living there full time. And so I didn't grow up in a bubble. I could see how bad things could be in so
Mhm.
many different ways. And that just realizing how incredibly privileged I was. And so, yes, I felt incredibly lucky as a little kid, for sure, just comparing what my lot could have been.
Yeah.
Um,
And so why does, and we don't know, what is, what are you born for, and what are you born into, and what are you born to do?
do.
And you have a destiny there, and what your talent and your ability to do to contribute, changes over a lifetime. That if you're lucky and you live a long time, you can see that change. And so there is that sense of obligation. Yes, it is a sense of being lucky, very lucky. And then also then what do you do with this? You don't get to just, put it in a little sack in a bank
Yeah,
vault here, you know.
exactly.
Mm-hmm,
Yep.
mm-hmm.
Well, I'll ask one more question and then we can open it up to see if members of the audience would like to contribute questions. And you're incredibly prolific, which is one of the many things I really admire, because I'm like this turtle, I'm so slow. And so you have the nonfiction and you have the fiction. And is the process similar for each, or is it generated in a very different way? Is the process really different when you're approaching your nonfiction versus your fiction?
No, I think it's about the same actually.
Mm.
And I think the fiction that I write is probably truer than nonfiction,
Mm.
honestly. And so no, it works about the same. And I don't, I'm not a disciplined writer. So I write when it feels like I should be writing. And
Mhm.
so I know there are people who establish, a schedule and a routine and stuff, but I've never been able to do that. Usually these are people who get up at 5 o'clock to do it. And that wouldn't be me. And so, so I'm like 11 at night, I go, hey, I think I'm gonna, and so that's, what's the word, organically? I don't know.
Yes,
When,
yes, yeah.
or, what the old Indians, how they used to say, what is meant to be. And
Mhm,
so, I go by that then when I feel like it's meant to be.
mhm.
And and I enjoy it, it's fun.
Oh, when the ideas are just coming in and you really hear that voice, yeah, there's nothing more exciting to me than when I'm in that. And when we were in the quote green room before this all started, we were talking too about how our processes, one thing that's similar is we're not necessarily feeling like we're choosing what we're writing, but just whatever we're meant to be working on next, whatever voice, whatever situation, it just kind of makes itself known. And
Hmm.
like, okay, I guess this is my assignment, you know.
I think that Native people feel that we don't actually create anything. And so since we're not doing it, um, it is it is something that is going to be, and maybe we will be fortunate enough to be somebody who gets to go in and write about it. But
Mhm.
because we didn't really create this, we don't really control it either, I
Yeah.
don't think.
Yes.
And I think, for me, I approach writing with that understanding. I know not everybody does it that way. And I know it probably sounds really haphazard, which it is really, but it's the way I enjoy doing it. And what
Mhm.
a great thing it is to be able to just do something you enjoy.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So there is a question here. I'd like to know if Linda has a new book coming out soon or if she's working on one now. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking me that question. I do have a new book. I don't know if you can see that. It's called A Song Over Misquah Rapids, and it will be released in November, in early November. And it is a novel, and it too is set in northeastern Minnesota. And some of the people in there will be familiar. And it's kind of a visit back to something 50 years ago and something going on today. And there is a connection, as there is in all events in life, that you know something something 50 years ago certainly can have an effect on
Mm.
what life is today. So
Yes.
I appreciate somebody asking that. Thank you so much.
And is Auntie Girly? I want to read more about Auntie Girly, and oh, poor thing with her the trachoma on that hurt her eyes, and yet I
Yes.
loved the way she described that there were some ways that she could see better, in her own way. She wasn't feeling sorry for herself, and
Yeah, and so things, I mean, with her scarred cornea, things are like looking through a window with rain spattered on it or something. And so I know. And so when she saw the two girls, she told them they look like their mother, even though she said, I don't think they really do. But
right, it was a gift. It's like she knew this was going to be a gift to them.
it was the perfect thing. Yeah.
Okay, here is another question. Um, I brought oh, a person's wondering if there's more to say about whether writing has an influence on teaching or vice versa. So does writing have an influence on teaching or the other way around?
I think they do kind of nourish each other as we're doing it. It's not like, oh my gosh, I have to teach now, so I can't write. Everything to me is always, I mean, my spread out, and I'm working on it all the time. And so I don't know if they influence each other so much as they do nourish each other. It keeps things alive and growing.
Mhm. Okay, now they're coming in thick and fast. Another person asks, how old were you, Linda, when you wrote your first story? What did your dad think of your writing? I love Dance Boots. It will always be one of my favorite books. Looking forward to seeing you on Friday at the Indigenous Writers Gathering.
Oh, thank you. Um, I've written little stories, when I was a little girl, I did a lot. And my mother actually saved a lot of stuff and handed me a couple of grocery bags, brown paper grocery bags, about 15, 20 years ago, and said, here. I'm like, oh my God, how did you keep this? So one of the stories that my mother thought was especially strange was about a little girl named Rosa who was very heroic because she kept coming across fires and putting them out. And my mother was she told me years later, she was kind of suspicious about Rosa and where all these fires were getting started. But, so yeah, there was one of my stories where there is a single character who is heroic.
Another question on page 23, Auntie Girly, these folks are great. Auntie Girly says she's telling us this so that you can understand how the past has an influence on the present and in fact never goes away. Talk a little bit about generational trauma. How might this impact Azure and Rainey in their futures?
Oh, I think that Azure and Rainey, whether they recognize that term, intergenerational trauma, are like I don't know, just about every American Indian person I know, we're all like a bunch of poster children for this, I think. And I think that it is helpful to understand the background of some of this. And that is actually the reason that I really began to write what I write now when I began with the dance boots, that there's something in the background here. And we know Native people who are, lawyers and doctors and teachers, and we know Native people who have not been able to get where they really, really wanted to go. And what is in one's history and one's ancestors' histories are absolutely, at the foundation of this. And what will you do and what can you do? Are you operating with like a bag over your head where you can't see this or know this, which I have been for most of my life? Is understanding this going to at least have some knowledge and some strength through that knowledge? People talk often these days, they use the word healing things. And I don't myself, I really don't think that happens. But I do think that understanding makes it possible to be able to spiritually and in every other way of your life, be able to continue to exist and to survive and thrive, and then do your best to make sure that others who come up behind you can do that too.
There's another question here. As someone who moved to Minnesota as an adult, I've loved discovering so many wonderful Minnesota authors, and I'm wondering if you have any Minnesota or other upper Midwest books that you especially enjoy.
Well, I enjoy Mona's stuff a whole lot. And I especially, okay, now your book of stories set in Chicago. Now I can't remember. Roofwalker. I was just astounded by that book, and I still have the one you signed for me when I met you once a long time ago. But I enjoy that. I had said in Chicago, but you are of this area for sure. I've been enjoying Marcy Rendon's mysteries lately with her young woman Cash Renee Black Bear. I see that there are so many Native people in the upper Midwest writing these days, and it's just like something is blossoming and growing here. It's and it's such a pleasure, to see this, to see other people getting their stuff published. I try, as I know you do too, Mona, to be really encouraging of people who are writing, and we realize that we are really lucky getting your stuff published. There's a lot of good stuff being written, but a lot of it has to do with being lucky. And we've been lucky in so many ways. So I've been enjoying a lot of the stuff. And there's some really young folks writing. Dennis Staples up in northern Minnesota has some. I think he's working on his second book right now, and he's young, and his is from a young male perspective. I just really love the stuff that I'm seeing coming out now.
Me too. And I just want to put in a plug for Tashia Hart's Native Love Jams. Oh my God, just such a wonderful comedy, romance. Oh, it's just a really fun book. I really love that one.
Oh, and and there are people who are writing, but they're also doing other things. I mean, Tashia has a cookbook out.
Mhm.
She's an artist. She's a beadwork artist. And so many Native people I know really, I think they just want to make things. I don't know if create is the word, but I think they do like to make things.
And oh, this is a great question. One of the things I remembered most from the book and admired were the descriptions of the laundry. Can you talk about how you chose to use the idea of the stains and how they revealed so much?
One of my sisters, actually, a lot of people in my family worked at a nursing home near our house. And one of my sisters, a couple of them maybe, worked in the laundry, and they used to talk about that, and this is before laundry was sent out, they're doing it on the premises. And I know one of the girls, and she's only like 16, my sister, and she just talked about something about she was treating stains and putting things in, and she just started talking about that this must have been from this woman because this, and I just thought, oh my gosh, here's a 16-year-old girl, and she's taking care and thinking of the stories of people whose dirty laundry she's doing. And and having that sense of, I don't know, wonder about the world and other people in it, and your little tiny part here where you're just spraying, using the bleach or whatever and sticking them in the machine.
And the sensitivity too of that and the imagination of that. Yeah, to be able to use that as a jumping off point to understand the different people better. So people should feel free to ask more questions, but I wanted to make sure you had time to read another selection from the book.
I will. I'll read something very short near the end. And this is when Rainey lives in a group home next to Azure. And Rainey has been agitated and run outside in the rain. So Azure brought her back in the house. I held out my hand, which she grasped, rising to her feet. It's so dark out here, Az, she said. Back at Lady Slipper House, we hung our soaked jackets over the backs of 2 stools at the kitchen counter, and then I heated water for hot chocolate while Rainey changed into dry pajamas. We watched the Weather Channel with Nadine and Brittany, the college girl soothing Rain with chatter about her new kitten, her fondness for grilled cheese sandwiches, and the scarf she was learning to crochet, until the end of her shift at 10 o'clock. Rain, calmed by the mostly one-sided conversation, or perhaps bored, blinked sleepily. Brittany, by instinct or nature, kept talking. It's a good night to stay inside, isn't it? Brittany asked Rain as she put on her jacket. I'm really going to sleep tonight. I love listening to the rain on the roof. Don't you? Rain looked nervous. Do you want my People magazine to look at before you go to bed? I can get it back when I see you tomorrow. Do you have to go? I have to go check and see how the little kitty is doing. I'll be back right after supper tomorrow, and then we can take a look and see what the garden looks like. I bet we'll have a lot of cleaning up to do out there. It's so dark outside. Nadine and Azure will watch me while I walk out to the car, won't you guys? We will for sure. I always watch out for you girls, answered Nadine. Will you take a picture of the kitty to show me? Asked Rain. Sure. And when she's a little bigger, maybe she can come for a visit. I walked with Rain into her bedroom, where in the dim light from the hallway, she turned back the quilt on the wall side of the bed where she had slept since we moved into Dolly's and Junior's house. Brittany's nice, isn't she? She asked as she slid her feet into the sheets and turned the pillow top to bottom, then side to side, as was her habit. Do you think she has a sister? Well, you'll have to ask her tomorrow when she comes into work. I hope she does. I hope she has a sister like you, Az. Tell me the story, Az, about the Northern Lights before you go. You know, the one where the lights sang and our mother danced. I sat in the small white glider chair next to my big little sister's bed and turned on the bedside lamp, a small pink ginger jar with a lavender shade similar to the one Dolly had bought when she fixed up Junior's bedroom for us. Well, it was when we lived in that apartment downtown, the one with the fireplace and the colored glass flowers across the top of the front room window. The one with the scary bathtub down the hall and the mean lady. Oh, she wasn't so mean. And remember, our mother washed us up at the kitchen sink so we didn't have to go into the bathtub. And outside the kitchen door, there was a little porch with stairs, remember? Yes, stairs up above and below. And our mother woke us up that night and brought us out to the little porch to see the northern lights. And she wrapped us in a blanket so that we wouldn't get cold. And the lights were singing to us. And then she got up and danced. Remember, Ash? I remember that. I do.
Oh, and the question, one of the final questions here is sort of perfect to go with that passage. They're wondering why the fact that Rainey has FAS comes late in the story, so we don't know until pretty late in the book. And could that have been expanded more if we knew this was the difficulty she was having earlier
I
on?
wondered about that. If about putting something in there, maybe somebody remarking that they thought that her problem was because of Loretta's drinking. But then I decided, no, I'm trying to keep this from the girls' perspective. And then and the struggles to try to get her assessed and try to get her into special services. And the school district could not help in that way. And I've certainly seen that working K-12. And I thought, no, I'm just going to let that struggle play itself out until eventually somebody will say, this is my theory on this, and let's try to get her some help.
Yes, and that is so much the true story for many families. It can take years and years and years. And there are parents that I knew that they tormented themselves because they thought, why is this happening? They were often they had adopted a child that had all these difficulties. And then when they found out what it was, after years of beating themselves up, it was a little tiny bit of, okay, it wasn't us. We didn't, they felt like, what have we done wrong?
Yeah. And you know then what it is and where, you can start in a direction, just having that knowledge.
Yes.
The time has come. Thank you both so very much. I'm so appreciative, and I know the whole audience was as well for this conversation and the reading. It's always such a dichotomy, an event like this on Zoom. I felt so connected to the conversation you were having, and yet here I am in my office, like vocalizing and nodding, and I was writing down so many things that you both said, and I'm just incredibly grateful. Thank you both so very much. Thank you to everyone else who was a part of this program tonight. We will put the link in the chat and wanted to let people know, if you haven't read yet In the Night of Memory or would like to reread it, although your questions clearly prove that you know this story very well, the book is still available through eBooks Minnesota through Sunday, September 24th, and you can visit thefriends.org/onebook for additional resources. I'd like to thank our partners for this program, the Council of Regional Public System Administrators, Mackin VIA, Minitex, the Minnesota Department of Education, and University of Minnesota Press. This program is made possible in part by the voters of Minnesota through a legislative appropriation through the Minnesota Department of Education. So we want to hear what this program has meant to you, so be on the lookout for a brief questionnaire that'll come in the next couple of days. We will also share a recording of this program. So as always, I am leaving this program, and I'm leaving this tonight with an even greater appreciation for the amazing writers that we have in our state and for the thoughtful readers. So thank you again, especially you, Linda, and you, Mona, for being here and sharing your thoughts and perspectives with us. And thank you again to everyone for being a part of One Book, One Minnesota. Good night.
Good night. Miigwech.
Good night.